After wrecking the economy and pushing American workers to the brink, Donald did what he does best. He caved. Yes, indeed. He caved to China after pretending for weeks that he was a tough guy. And then, because he's him, he called it a win. For weeks, he's been trying to project strength, which is an exercise in futility because he doesn't have any. And he's been claiming that nobody's been tougher on China than he is. But over the weekend, as I just said, and I think it bears repeating, he caved. The United States and China reached a fragile temporary agreement, which is a 90-day suspension on a narrow set of the tariffs Donald imposed unilaterally upon one of our largest trading partners. Here's ABC News with that breakdown.
A dramatic retreat from President Trump's 145% tariffs that he imposed on Chinese imports. After all of the tough talk and hard lines, both sides agreeing to dramatically roll back their tariffs, at least for now. This morning, the Trump administration emerging from a marathon weekend of negotiations, announcing the U.S. has reached a trade deal with China to significantly lower most tariffs for 90 days.
We have reached an agreement on a 90-day pause and substantially moved down the tariff levels.
The U.S. agreed to roll back its steep 145% tariff on Chinese imports to 30%, and China agreeing to lower its tax on American goods from 125% to 10%. For weeks, the president has been defiant about keeping his tariffs in place, even as markets tumbled and retailers warned their shelves could go empty.
I know what the hell I'm doing. I know what I'm doing, and you know what I'm doing too.
Yeah, well, we do know what you're doing, idiot. Does somebody want to do a wellness check on Scott Bessent? He didn't seem to be doing very. Actually, I don't care. But he was clearly choking on his words, as he should. And I think this is also worth repeating. It was a retreat. Donald retreated like brave Sir Robin. And if you know what I'm talking about, good for you. You have seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I'm not going to tell you how many times I've seen it. Anyway, this happened not just because China stood its ground and made it very, very clear from the beginning that they were having none of it. They do not fear Donald Trump. They do not think that he had the upper hand here, and they stood firm. But also because these stupid, completely ill-considered policies that Donald put into place were essentially strangling the economy and grinding traffic at American ports to a standstill, which, in case you were wondering, is terrible for our economy. On Friday, for the first time since the pandemic, not a single cargo ship left China for California's largest ports. That was 4 years ago. And there was a reason back then. There was a global pandemic that was killing millions of people. The only reason that there weren't any cargo ships leaving China for California this time around is because of Donald and his idiocy. Officials at the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles were sounding the alarm. Cancellations are continuing to pile up. Cargo volume has collapsed by over 30%. And one port commissioner told CNN, quote, "Nothing is being shipped," unquote. ABC News reports that nearly 2/3 of Americans disapprove of Donald's tariffs. And this assessment is affecting his overall approval rating because these tariffs are already affecting American jobs. So I want to take a look at what led to Donald's retreat, because the pressure did not just come from China. It also came from workers on the ground here. But before we go on, I just want to remind you that Mary Trump Media is not corporate media. We do not bend the knee. We are not for sale now, nor will we ever be. We expose the lies the Trump regime tells every day and tries to keep buried. Independent media survives because of you. So please like and share our videos. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. So again, Donald did not just fold because of international pressure, which is to say, because other countries held firm and did not give in to his blackmail, which was entirely what he was expecting, he folded in part because it was becoming difficult, if not impossible, to ignore the crisis that he himself was creating here. Now, workers started pushing back. I'm not entirely convinced that he cares about that at all. However, he does care about his approval ratings. At the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach, 1 in 12 jobs in the region depends on cargo traffic. That's almost 10% of jobs dependent upon one industry, the industry that Donald is single handedly decimating. That traffic collapsed by 35% for the first time, again, since the pandemic. Dock workers were showing up to the dispatch office and leaving empty handed. Entire supply chains, from trucking to warehousing, have been paralyzed. Sal Di Contanza from ILWU Local 13 told NBC over 235 union members could not get work Friday alone. And Charlie Camacho, who's a longshore worker, said his chances of getting a job that day were, quote, maybe 25%, unquote. Even independent workers like Frank Groves, who sells gloves and safety gear at the airport, have seen their sales plummet by 75%. The impact of this is generational. Camacho's grandmother worked the ports, and now he is watching that legacy grind to a halt, negatively impacted by tariffs that affect an industry that is adjacent to his and upon which his company depends. Gene Soroka, who's executive director of the Port of LA, put it plainly, quote, "The situation is not good. People are quite concerned. Absolutely," unquote. Wow, I admire your reserve. Now, workers have every reason to be concerned. They are living in the middle of a collapse, while the Trump regime, of course, tries to pretend everything is just fine. Howard Lutnick, who's Donald's billionaire commerce secretary and has zero credibility among the working class or, well, among any sentient being, spent the weekend on television telling port workers to stay optimistic. And also, he tried to convince them that the situation wasn't as bad as it looked, or I guess you could say, as it actually seemed to them. Lutnick made multiple appearances over the weekend while negotiations with China played out in Geneva. His job, apparently, was to sell the delusion that everything was just fine, to convince people not to believe their lying eyes or the impact on their wallets. And Donald, in the background, very quietly, was trying to reverse course. But you cannot gaslight people who are standing outside the dispatch office waiting for a job that they would normally have no problem getting, but that no longer exists. Even with the pause, though, tariffs remain at 30%, which is dramatically higher than when Donald came into office at the end of January. And the cost continues to land squarely on American consumers and workers, which of course it does, because that's how tariffs work, whether or not Donald understands that. But even if the tariffs vanish tomorrow, the damage is done. Sudden reversals are not suddenly fixed. As Diane Middleton, a former Los Angeles City Harbor commissioner with over 50 years of experience, explained, quote, "You don't just have ships lined up like taxi cabs. You don't have to reserve vessels. You have to reserve vessels. You have to specify a time. Once you've cut all that off, you can't bring it back in a minute," unquote. This sudden reversal will not fix the damage already done or the damage that has essentially already been scheduled to occur over the next 1 to 3 months. It's going to take that much time at least just to stop the bleeding. And then, of course, on top of that, this country cannot relax because we cannot trust that Donald won't get into his little head to start imposing tariffs randomly and indiscriminately again. According to the AP, quote, "Businesses and investors must contend with uncertainty about whether the truce will last," unquote. We know that the ripple effects are already being felt. There have been layoffs, lost contracts, massive shipping delays. How are we going to get any of that back? Are people going to get their jobs? Are the people who didn't get the contracts going to get them back? And as we know, the shipping delays are going to continue. In the long term, the United States could lose its edge entirely when it comes to trade. Middleton warns that countries like China may start seeking more stable trading partners, which would be a shift in a decades old supply pattern. Donald's recklessness did not just create a momentary crisis, it may have altered the foundation of global commerce. And that, again, is because he's deeply ignorant and he always thinks that not only is he the smartest person in the room, which obviously is a deeply delusional thing, but always that he always thinks he's the strongest person in the room. Now, granted, being president of the United States does give you a massive amount of leverage over other countries, but a lot of countries have leverage of their own. As we saw, they were more than happy to place tariffs on American exports, which kind of leveled the playing field and sent a very clear message that they're not playing this game. And they're more than happy to isolate America and undermine our position of strength in the global economy. We also know, and they certainly know, that once trade patterns shift, they're not going to shift back so easily. It's not as if a new administration is going to come in 2028 and the world is going to trust us again. Why would they? We elected that twice. That's the part the Trump regime is not willing to grapple with. There is no instant reset button. And yet, Donald still believes that he can convince people that he's the one solving all of the problems. After the 90-day tariff pause was announced, the markets rebounded, which unfortunately for us kind of helps him make his case, even though it's all smoke and mirrors. The NASDAQ jumped more than 3%, the Dow clawed back earlier losses, and stocks for companies like Amazon, Apple, and Tesla rebounded, all companies that have significant amounts of business in China and would have been seriously negatively affected if those 145% tariffs had stayed in place. Corporate media headlines were just gushing about the easing of tensions. And of course, Donald's inner circle flooded the airwaves to frame the moment as some brilliant act of leadership and strategy. But let's be real. The rally came after Donald set this entire thing on fire. And now he wants credit for helping in some small part to put the fire out. This is what Charlie Sykes had to say today on MSNBC.
Well, I mean, the arsonist can always pretend to be the firefighter, right? If he sets the fire and then he puts it out with a garden hose. Look, this is going to be good news for the markets, but I would suggest some cautious skepticism, since this administration has hyped some of these deals, which actually turn out not to be deals. They turn out to be frameworks or suggestions. I think we need to wait a little bit to see what the Chinese say about all of this. But keep in mind, this is temporary, so the uncertainty still exists.
Donald always needs to be seen as the hero, which is kind of hysterical because he's never been one and he's not even good. But, he also always wants credit for everything. He has this bizarre image of himself as being the one who is always coming back from the worst possible position. But in this particular case, and in fact, in most particular cases, if you know anything about his life history, the person who put him in the bad position is him. He started all of this. He started a trade war unilaterally and unprovoked with our trading partners without understanding why he was doing it or what the impact would be. He completely lost control. And did he save the day? Well, I guess it depends on your perspective. Is retreating, is basically conceding without actually conceding that you fucked up epically and are now kind of realizing that maybe those 145% tariffs weren't such a good idea in the first place because you're giving your competitor a massive advantage over you. Is that a win? Well, maybe it's a win for the global economy, but, if Donald's win is based on the fact that he's a total loser who understands nothing, yeah, well, good luck. Good luck making that look like a good thing. Please take a second and like and share this video. It'd be awesome if you could subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please follow us and give the show a 5-star rating because it really does help other people find our content. Thanks.